In this question about sacrifices, there are really two questions that we're asking. And so I'm going to kind of take them one at a time. The first question really is, and I've asked some people this, where in the Bible does it say that Jesus is the final sacrifice for all sacrifices? And they usually turn to Hebrews, where it talks about Jesus being the final sacrifice for sin. At which point I say, well, in order for it to be a sacrifice for sin, doesn't it have to be the shedding of blood? For the Bible says, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin, which is what the Bible says. And yet there are two sacrifices that were in the sacrificial system that did not include blood. One of them was the drink offering, and one of them was the meal offering. Neither one of those two sacrifices included the shedding of blood. One of them was the bringing of a crop from the field, like wheat or barley, and was ground to be flour. And the other one is the bringing of a wine as a sacrifice, the fruit of the vineyard and grapes. So those two are not sacrifices that take away sin. And if you look at the story of the sacrifices, you realize that not all the sacrifices are for sin. There's the burnt offering, which is a sacrifice for worship. And there's a peace offering, or what's sometimes called the thank offering, which is for thanksgiving. So there are sacrifices that are not for sin. The other interesting thing is, as you look at the book of Ezekiel, the whole tenor of the sacrifices in Ezekiel are different. Matter of fact, in my conversations with rabbis in Jerusalem, they have told me that they would not ever do a sacrifice the way Ezekiel describes them. They would be afraid that the same thing would happen to them as what happened to Aaron's sons when they offered what the Bible calls strange fire. And they would be afraid that the way Ezekiel describes the sacrifices, the whole of the sacrificial system, and we're not going to get into that, but we could in some of our seminars talk about these kinds of things, that the sacrificial system in Ezekiel is entirely different than the rest of the Old Testament sacrifices. So you're talking about not only is Jesus the final sacrifice for all sin, but is there a possibility that the sacrifice in Ezekiel could be for something other than sin? I think it's very clear that that's probably where these sacrifices belong. They are different. They are put in different categories than what the sacrifices from Moses talked about. And they are done on a different kind of altar than is prescribed by Moses in the law.